Let's just dive right in, shall we? Today, we're going to challenge a really massive assumption that almost all of us carry around in the modern world, and that's the idea that having faith is, well, just taking a blind leap into the dark. Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to be exploring a seriously fascinating source text today, the Qur'an, and we'll look at how its framework literally flips our standard everyday definition of faith completely upside down. Here is our map for today's journey. We'll start with guidance before belief, move beyond blind faith, look at trusting the bridge, talk about a growing certainty, examine the scientist and the map, and finally wrap up with mind, heart, and hands. Let's see how this paradigm shift actually works. So, Section 1, Guidance Before Belief. We're starting with a major departure from what you might expect. The Qur'an doesn't actually begin by demanding that you believe first. Not at all. Instead, it begins by pointing, inviting, and presenting signs. So guidance is actually offered first. To an outsider, this looks like a surprisingly logical progression. Step 1, you have signs. Step 2, those signs prompt reflection. Step 3, that reflection leads to recognition, which builds trust in Step 4. And finally, Step 5 results in commitment. And this brings us to a really fascinating concept, the Arabic word Īmān. Now, Iman is the trust and commitment that arises from recognizing that guidance. It's not some blind leap into the darkness. Actually, it's a lot closer to recognizing a reliable pattern and then intentionally entrusting yourself to it. Moving right along to Section 2, Beyond Blind Faith. You know, one of the most widespread modern definitions of faith is believing something despite having zero evidence. It's so common that faith and reason are almost always pitted against each other, right? But this source text repeatedly asks its readers to actually use their intellect. It asks, do they not reflect? Do they not observe? Do they not reason? The Arabic word ayah is super interesting here because it means both a sign and a verse. So it's presenting the universe itself, along with the revelation, as two overlapping collections of signs pointing to the exact same reality. And it's specifically meant for people who think. Now, a super common notion is that faith is just, intellectual agreement, simply saying, sure, I believe God exists. But think about it. A person could acknowledge a ton of truths while utterly refusing to actually live by them. True Īmān isn't just intellectual. It requires emotional trust, moral alignment, and practical commitment. It's the profound difference between just saying, yeah, I think this is true, and saying, because I know this is true, I am orienting my entire life around it. All right, Section 3, Trusting the Bridge. To really wrap our fins around this, let's look at how faith operates as relational trust in our everyday lives. Think about a surgeon, for instance. You might intellectually believe a surgeon is highly qualified, right? I mean, you see their fancy diplomas hanging on the wall. But real trust? That only actually appears when you agree to lie down on the operating table. It's exactly the same with a bridge. You might firmly believe a bridge was engineered correctly, but faith is demonstrated when you actually put your car in drive and cross it. The source material treats belief in God in that exact same way. Iman isn't merely believing facts about God, it's trusting God enough to act on it. Basically, you have to cross the bridge. That brings us to Section 4, a growing certainty. A lot of traditions out there treat faith like a static possession. Like a light switch. You either have it 100% or you completely lack it, no in between. But the Qur'an repeatedly describes a highly dynamic faith. It's a quality that naturally fluctuates, it grows. Every life experience, every answered prayer, every hardship you endure with patience, and every time you reach a deeper understanding, all of that can actually strengthen and grow your Iman. So the crucial takeaway here is understanding the distinction between Īmān, which is faith, and yaqeen, which means certainty. See, someone can possess perfectly genuine faith while still actively growing in certainty. The text even notes that Abraham himself asked to see how God gives life to the dead, and he didn't ask that because he disbelieved. He asked because he was seeking a much deeper level of assurance. This just proves that having genuine faith is completely compatible with asking sincere, probing questions. Now for Section 5, the scientist and the map. Let's ground all this theory with a couple of practical, modern analogies to see how this ancient progression actually plays out. Imagine you're hiking through a dense, really confusing forest, and someone hands you an incredibly accurate map. Well, that map is Huda, the guidance. Taking the time to study that map, recognizing that it's actually reliable, and then making the conscious decision to follow it, that is Īmān. And then walking the path, that's the righteous action that naturally follows.
Or, hey, consider the scientific method. Imagine a scientist examining decades of hard data until she finds a theory that consistently explains reality. At a certain point, she's going to start relying on that theory to make predictions and design new experiments. She doesn't stop thinking, right? Rather, she trusts the theory because she has really good evidentiary reasons to do so. The Qur'anic idea of Iman is just so much closer to that kind of evidence-based trust than it is to just believing with your eyes tightly closed.
And finally, section 6, mind, heart, and hands. Okay, let's directly compare our initial assumptions with what the source text actually says. This table perfectly captures the whole paradigm shift we've been talking about today. The popular notion says faith is believing without evidence, but the Qur'an says it's trust arising from recognized signs. Popularly, it's seen as blind acceptance and a static identity. Here, it's a reflective acceptance and a highly dynamic quality that grows. And honestly, perhaps most importantly, while popular culture often assumes faith is totally opposed to reason, this concept actively invites and employs reason. And that brings us to a truly beautiful, concise summary of today's explainer. Huda is the light that shows the path. Īmān is the decision to trust that light enough to walk by it. Faith isn't just the absence of questions, guys. It is the willingness to commit after a sincere recognition of the signs. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought. You know, one of the most defining features of this whole progression is that it invites the mind before it ever asks for the heart, and asks for the heart before it expects the hands. So, if the mind is invited first, what signs are you willing to recognize? Take a moment and think about how you might apply this kind of evidence-based trust in your own life. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really encourage you to keep questioning, keep reflecting, and absolutely keep learning. Catch you next time.